I believe inflation's already here. I don't think we're waiting for it to arrive. I think it's already appeared. The question is how bad it's going to get. As we know in the past, once inflation's in the system, it doesn't actually disappear until you stop it, which is through rate hikes. But the Fed's telling us they're not going to hike rates till 2022, maybe even 2024, depending on which Fed president you listen to. So I look at all that and I see that we're probably going to have a stagflationary situation similar to the 70s, in which the economy's weak and prices rise and inflation becomes a problem for everyone. It's a little early. We're seeing inflation in certain sectors, but not everything yet. But if you look at some of these sort of, we can get into the nitty gritty if you'd like. I don't know if that's something your listeners care to hear, but.
Yeah, actually, I'm interested in, this is just for contextual basis. I'm interested in the difference in a previous conversation you and I had. You made the distinction between the Weimar Republic, which is a famous episode in economic history after World War I, where people were taking wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread, because if they didn't buy the bread at that point, it would be even more expensive a couple hours later. The inflation was so rampant. You draw the distinction between that and the 70s. So if you could just kind of lay it out, what you mean. What are the
So in Weimar, the way that happened was you had a debt collapse and a currency collapse simultaneously, and in which case basically the whole financial system lost credibility. This time around, I don't think the financial system will lose credibility simply by virtue of the fact that no one wants it to happen. Weimar was also a situation in which you already had ascendant economies surpassing Germany and the United States and the UK to some degree. Whereas this case, I guess you'd have to argue China's ascending past the United States, but in order for that to work, you would have to have China's currency be a viable alternative, which it isn't. And that's the other reason I don't think you'd get Weimar this time around, is there's no viable alternative to replace the dollar. The euro has far more structural problems. The yuan, no matter how much China tries to make it popular, it's only used in about 6% of global currency transactions. It's just too early. If we were going to have a Weimar for the US, it would have to be like a decade or two from now, when China had already sort of passed us and their currency was used in a much larger way in the global system. But right now, the dollar comprises something like 95% of all currency transactions globally. So for that to go into a hyperinflationary event, well, then you're talking about the entire global financial system ceasing to function, which I don't think policymakers would. I think they'd rather do anything than allow that to happen. So in terms of the 70s and what's going on now, if you actually read a lot of Fed research, which unfortunately I do, the Fed actually has more, I think, PhD economists working for them than any organization in the country. They've got something like 400 economic PhDs working on things, and these people need tasks to do. So every now and then somebody says to one of them, hey, why don't you write a paper on something or other, like inflation? The Fed likes to brag that it uses consumer price index and the personal consumption expenditures, the CPI and the PCE for their inflationary measures, but there's no actual concrete evidence those are good measures of inflation. So the Fed had these two researchers in 2000 do an audit of all the inflationary measures and how good they were at actually predicting future inflation. What they found was that the two measures the Fed uses are pretty much useless at predicting future inflation. And the thing that was the best at predicting future inflation was food price inflation. What they found was that whenever food prices begin to rise rapidly, that is the single best predictor of future inflation in the system. Well, if you go and you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the fastest rising prices in our system right now are food prices. The inflationary rate's about 5.6% year over year. So that's one big significant factor.